Hello, the name is Regis Kilbin, and the game is Hearthstone, and today I'm going to talk about the 10 best free cards in Hearthstone. Now, Hearthstone has a set of basic cards that are included in everyone's collection by default. Sometimes you'll have to level a hero up to level 20 to unlock all of those cards, but you can for sure gain them all without spending any money as long as you're a little bit dedicated to leveling up your characters. And it might seem like just because they're free cards that they aren't playable, and they won't be good in competitive decks, but that's simply not the case. There are a lot of free cards that are incredibly viable, and in fact, still see play in top-level competitive decks, despite being years old at this point. So I want to talk about the 10 best of those cards. These are the cards that if you're a new player, you should start to think about building decks around and including in all of the decks that are of a relevant class to that card. So if you find ways to put these in your decks, I think your average deck strength will increase in general. Just be sure to complement them with some crafted cards of higher rarities. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and jump right into the list. At number 10, the 10th best free card in Hearthstone is Acidic Swamp Ooze. This 2-mana 3/2 has a pretty interesting battle cry: destroy your opponent's weapon. It's very hard to find good neutral minions in the classic basic card set, but this is certainly one of them. It's got a nice body for 2 mana. With that pressurizing 3 attack, makes it a little bit threatening so people have to deal with it. Plus, its battle cry is very, very strong. You can completely neutralize any weapon that might be across from you with just a simple 2-mana play. So you deposit a body, and you destroy a resource of your opponent, so it's a nice little tempo advantage, and some board presence, making it a strong card. It shows up in all kinds of decks as a cheap way to remove weapons, particularly in a weapon-heavy meta, if classes like Hunter, Warrior, or Paladin are thriving. So, the number 9 card is, let's get it pulled up, the 3-mana Animal Companion for Hunters. This is actually a spell, but it's a spell that summons you a minion. It summons a random beast champion, as it says, and almost regardless of which beast you get, all 3 of them are really strong for 3 mana. So, one option is Misha, which is a 4/4 taunt, and that's just distinctly better than the 3/3 taunt that's a neutral card by default. You could also get a 2/4 Leok, which buffs all other minions' attack by 1, which can be really nice and synergize with a couple different things Hunter does, like Unleash the Hounds. And then finally, you can get the beloved Huffer, the beloved Huffer, the 4/2 with charge that allows you to pile on damage very, very quickly. All 3 of those minions are undercosted for 3 mana. In other words, they should probably cost 3.5 to 4 mana, meaning it's almost always a hit when you're able to cast Animal Companion. Plus, because it's a spell, it allows you to do some interesting things with spell synergies and avoid stuff like a Mirror Entity Secret from a Mage. So there are some side advantages to the fact that this is a spell as well. It is a core card for Hunters. It shows up in almost every Hunter deck just because it's pure value. It's good at doing damage and even good at building board presence, so you can't really go wrong when it comes to Animal Companion. Very rarely will it ever whiff, and 90% of the time you'll probably end up with Huffer. So the number 8 card is the Rogue's Deadly Poison. This is a 1-mana spell that gives your weapon +2 attack. It might not sound like much, but Rogues thrive on cheap spells, and this is a good one just because it is high value. Typically, you'll use it on your hero power weapon, which means it's a 1-mana spell that does roughly 4 extra damage. That's really good. But it also combos with things like Rogue's Blade Flurries to allow you to pull off sneaky board clears. And if you use it on a weapon with even more durability, of course, the damage possibilities go even higher, making this a super high value card. It's also good at triggering combos for Rogue and just pumping out face damage, which some Rogue decks certainly rely on. So Deadly Poison shows up in almost every Rogue deck, since most of them are built around weapon buffs, and this is kind of the core weapon buff card. Plus it's a free one, which is awfully nice. Moving on to the number 7 best free card in Hearthstone, let's take a look at the Druid spell Swipe. This 4-mana spell does 4 damage to 1 enemy, and then 1 damage to all remaining enemies, including the hero's face, the opponent's face. So you can use it on minions or on the face, allowing you to line up the damage in a few different ways, and typically to your advantage, clearing a board full of 1/1 minions or 1 health minions, and taking out a big target along the way, or even just piling on some extra damage. to look for lethal. So Swipe just has a lot of utility. You can use it creatively to do different things. It's great when buffed by spell power, because if it does 5 damage to the primary target and 2 damage to all others, that usually creates even more value, because there's a lot of 5 health and 2 health stuff out there. So Swipe is really a core removal piece for Druids. Druids don't have a lot of removal spells, and Swipe is an important one. Plus, Druids like to be able to sneak out a little bit of extra damage when necessary, because they always want to set up those combo turns for lethal, and Swipe is another way to do that. So moving on to the number 6 best free card. It is another Hunter spell. It's also 3 mana, but this time it's Kill Command. This card does 3 damage in its default state, but if you have a beast on the board, it's important, not just in your hand, but if you have a beast on the board, you deal 5 damage instead. So this is all about piling on burst damage, which Hunter is always looking to do. Hunters like to rush down their opponents and kill them as quickly as possible. And 5 damage for 3 mana is one of the most efficient ways in the game to do that. And typically, Hunters will have a beast on the board, particularly for decks that want to utilize Kill Command. So it's not that hard to trigger the 5 damage boost over the default 3 damage. Even 3 damage for 3 mana is not a terrible value. So sometimes it'll just be good in that regard as a desperate out, looking for 3 extra damage for lethal, but usually you'll be able to get that 5 damage off. And when you have a couple kill commands in hand along with your hero power, suddenly you're talking about 12 damage for 8 mana, which can be crazy to finish off games in the late game. So Kill Command is a very threatening card. Even if it's not in your deck, opponents have to worry about it, so there's a lot of value there. It shows up in almost all Hunter decks other than something like a Mech Hunter or a really late game Control Hunter, just because there's so much pure value packed into the card. Moving on to the next best free card. This time, it's a Shaman card, another 3 mana spell, but it's Hex, and it is probably the best hard removal spell in the game. It transforms a minion into a 0/1 frog with taunt. In other words, it basically completely neutralizes whatever threat that's out there on the enemy side of the board, whether they have a Kel'Thuzad or a Dr. Boom or Ragnaros or any scary legendary that you've never seen before. It doesn't matter. Hex is the great equalizer. It essentially silences it and transforms it into a useless minion. All for only 3 mana. That makes it better than something like a Mage's Polymorph or even a Priest's Shadow Word Death for 3 mana, because that doesn't silence them in turn, so you can use this in a lot of different ways. It's much stronger on average. Plus, it's totally free, making it pretty interesting for Shamans on a budget, just because you can compete with almost any other class's big threats for only 3 mana. That makes it a huge tempo play, because you can remove something like a 10 mana Deathwing for only 3 mana on your side, allowing you to continue to build up the board and gain an advantage. Hex is really a great equalizer, and I'm really thrilled that it's part of the classic basic free set for Shamans. It gives them some pretty interesting options to build affordable decks. So up next is actually another Shaman card. If I can type it out. It is the 6 mana minion Fire Elemental. This is the 4th best free card in Hearthstone by my take, and that's because it's just a really strong value minion that does a couple different things well. First off, it has really nice stats for 6 mana. 5 health is enough to get by. 6 attack is incredibly scary for people to deal with, so they feel like they have to answer it immediately. If they don't, you can just pile up too much damage from this card. But really where Fire Elemental stands out is that its Battle Cry is an instant effect. Its Battle Cry does 3 damage to anything you target, including the enemy's face or minions. So it's great to kind of counter the board. You can take out a cheat minion using that Battle Cry and establish a board of your own with a really threatening body. You could also just use it on the enemy face if you need 3 damage for lethal. So Fire Elemental is probably the best default minion in the game for classic set cards. It just doesn't get any stronger than this. He shows up in most Shaman decks. Now, admittedly, Shaman's a little weak in general and isn't super competitive in the metagame, but on a budget, Shaman really stands out, and Fire Elemental is one of the big reasons why. There just aren't too many late game minions that have this much value that are free cards. Typically, you have to spend a lot of Arcane Dust to craft those legendary or epic cards to stand out as a late game minion, but Fire Elemental sneaks in as the best free minion in the game by my thoughts. So now we're down to the top 3. And number 3 is the Warrior card, Fiery War Axe. Now this card is so good that it's typically nicknamed Fiery Win Axe. That's right, win instead of war, because if you draw it on turn 2, it's often said that warriors pretty much just win the game, and that is a reference to control warrior decks who need early presence to keep up and then dominate in the late game, and Fiery War Axe is exactly what that offers them. It's just a super high value weapon. 3 attack is really strong for only 2 mana. It only has 2 charges, but often that's all you'll need before warriors can really start building up the board and stabilizing in the mid game. So this is the lifeline that allows you to do that and pretty much answer any minions that might show up on the other side of the board in the early game. And taking face damage isn't too risky because warriors do have the option to armor up using their hero power plus a lot of life gain cards later on in their set. So Fiery War Axe really just sets you up for victory, whether it's drawn in the early game or even in the late game for a little extra damage and clear. It can do so many different things and do it well. And it's very cheap in regards to tempo, and it's totally free in regards to your collection. So starting any warrior deck with Fiery War Axe is a pretty safe bet. And now the number 2 best free card in Hearthstone is another weapon, but this time it's the Paladin card, True Silver Champion. This 4 mana, 4/2 sword does something else. It's whenever your hero attacks, you get 2 extra health added onto your hero. So you attack for 4 and you heal for 2, which is totally nuts. I remember when I first started playing Hearthstone, I thought this card couldn't be real because it was just too good. There's just too much happening. It's 8 damage total for 4 mana, but it's also 4 healing. So you get 8 damage and 4 healing, all packed into 4 mana, which is just absurd to me. It makes it crazy good. It is a centerpiece for pretty much every Paladin deck. I can't think of a single Paladin deck that doesn't sneak in True Silver Champion. It's been around forever, but it still stands strong as the epitome of weapons in the game. It is the best weapon in the game, and it's free. So how can you pass that up? True Silver Champion is indeed the champion of free Hearthstone cards, but not exactly the best. There's one more that I think is better. The best free card in Hearthstone happens to be the mage spell Fireball. It's really pretty simple. It is 6 damage for 4 mana, but Fireball is in every mage deck ever just because it's so good at pumping out damage at low cost. You can use 2 of them to do 12 damage for 8 mana, add in a Frostbolt, and you're looking at 15 damage in a single turn. That's nuts. It's great at hitting enemy face. It's good at killing minions. When you buff it with spell damage, it gets even scarier. It's good in control-style mage decks. It's good in freeze-style mage decks. It's good in tempo-style mage decks. Pretty much every mage there's ever been likes to have a Fireball in their hand. I can't count how many times I've lost games to Fireball, top-decked, kept in pocket the entire game. It doesn't matter. Fireball seals the deal and wins games for mages. It is the best free card in Hearthstone. Start every mage deck with Fireball and build from there. You can't go wrong when you're fireballing the enemy's face. And there you have it. That is the 10 best free cards in Hearthstone. Thanks so much for watching. Get out there and start playing with these cards. And until next time, game on.